Hello and welcome to the season premiere of season 5 of the Silmarillion film project.
That's right.
You may be surprised to hear, but I am Dave Kale coming
Yeah,
to you
that's
from
not
the
Trish.
Bay
Trish didn't
Area.
suddenly get a lower voice.
You
That's
should
right.
start with "Let me introduce myself" or something.
Yeah. Back from my self-imposed exile in parenthood. I'm here. I'm ready to talk about the Silmarillion, and I am so excited about this season. So let me introduce the co-hosts who have been here even in my absence. Corey Olson, the Tolkien professor, and Trish Lambert, the Tolkien maven. It's so good to talk to you guys. Good to be
Excellent.
Yeah,
So
you
good to
too.
have
It's
you
good to hear
back
your
from
voice.
paternity leave, Dave. So you've survived and all. Has everyone survived? Everyone's doing okay there with the whole adjustment to
Yeah.
the new sibling and all that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot. There's the adjustment of the new sibling, which on the whole went really well. There was about a month there where I was sleeping on a fold-out mattress on the floor outside of
Right.
Wally's room.
Right.
But
Right.
as I was telling you guys off the air, we've re-sleep trained, and I'm now back sleeping in an adult bed. So that's nice.
That's exciting.
Yay!
It's a major step right there.
Yeah. Now we're dealing with, daycare being closed and
Of course.
Yeah.
change in schedule and trying to work from home. But these are all adventures that I know are familiar to you, Corey. So you're
Yes.
probably unsympathetic.
Well,
Or very
no,
sympathetic.
very sympathetic, very sympathetic. But yeah, it is a fun challenge. I remember several times in my early parenting days. I remember one time attempting. I had my kid, and I think this was Matthias. I had in a backpack while I was lecturing one day. Like I was trying to lead class discussion, and I had him in a backpack, and he started getting fussy. So I started feeding him over my shoulder, like while I was conducting class. I was able to multitask. My students less so. But glad things are evening out there in your household, Dave, and Trish, all is well with you down in Texas.
As well as can be. Yeah. Well, for me, it's not that different. I mean, I basically have been practicing for this particular occurrence for about 7 years now.
Right.
So,
I know
no worries.
there are many of us, who are like social distancing, not a problem.
Not
Like
a problem.
it's like second nature. So yeah.
Welcome to my world. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. No, it's good. Yeah. I mean, and of course, yeah, with Signum operating remotely since its conception. Yeah. We've already we're a little ahead of this curve on that one too. So
That's right.
So yeah, things have been relatively normal in my world. My kids are doing school from home. So and I got to say, their school's doing a great job. Actually, I'm really pleased with their school's synchronous online classes so far. So that's been cool.
That's great.
Yeah, they've been doing great. Anyway, so welcome. I know everyone is interested in having some things to think about and work on and talk about during this time. So let us jump into things, or nearly so. This, of course, is season 5 of the Silmarillion film project. And I got to say, although, we joked a lot, and it's not like I never intended to continue this film project to this point. That's not, of course, I always intended it, but there's a difference between intending it and believing it will actually happen. And there's a lot of kind of looking at this opening slide that says season 5 on it is kind of awesome, actually. This makes this one of the, not one of, I mean, I think this has to be now the longest running program we've ever done. I've ever done in the history of my podcast or of Signum and Mythgard. Riddles in the Dark was a mere 3 years in comparison. And, this has been...
That's true.
This has been...
That's right.
Already substantially longer than that, not just 4 seasons, but more than that in terms of years, actually. So, calendar years. So anyhow, this has been great fun. Looking forward to continuing the adventure. And this season really is an exciting time. Last season, last season was the one that we talked about being really excited to get to, and it's not like we weren't, but we were also kind of joking a little bit because like last season was the kind of running joke of the Film project, right? When we finally got to Of Beleriand and its realms, everyone's least favorite, most boring chapter of the Silmarillion. So we'd been joking about like, oh man, like when we get to Of Beleriand and its realms, that's going to be, must-watch TV right there. And of course, like it was really fun and we did great with season 4. I think our season 4 was really excellent. And of course, now moving from that and now coming into season 5 where things start getting, the all of a sudden the character panel explodes, right, as we bring in all of the men from across the mountains. So lots of stuff. So tonight, there are two things that we're going to be looking to accomplish tonight. First is to sort of do a review of our discussion points, right? What are the things that we need to do? Let's do an overview, thinking about what we're going to need to accomplish. What are the stories that we're going to want to do, and be thinking through what that's going to mean this year. That's one thing. And the second thing we need to do is remind Dave about what happened in season 4. So. We'll see if we can do both of those things. But yes, you're right, Stephen. We're also, we should also really savor season 5 because it is going to be the last season up until the final episode. The first 12 episodes of season 5 will be the last long stretch of time in which we have a comparatively low mortality rate among our main characters. And we're gonna start bidding a fond farewell to lots of people fairly quickly once we get to the very last episode of season episode 13 of season 5, and then of course really from here on out essentially. But now it's true, Marie, you're right. We're going to lose a fair number of humans to old age. Like that is going to happen, but it's not quite exactly the same as what will be coming in future seasons. But you're right, Brian. It is indeed all downhill from here for the elves. So before we get too deep in, just a couple quick announcements. The first, of course, like normally I'm announcing our upcoming moots. That's been put on hiatus, of course, under the circumstances. We've had to postpone 2 of our regional moots, both Sunshine Moot and Magnolia Moot, have had to be pushed back. We don't have new dates on that. It's kind of hard to reschedule things when we don't know what's going to happen, so we're still kind of waiting on that. As of now, by the way, Myth Moot we're still planning Myth Moot. We have not canceled Myth Moot. We're not planning to cancel Myth Moot unless obviously things continue and the lockdowns carry. We're not going to do Myth Moot AMA, as my wife would say, against medical advice. But again, so long as, we'll wait and see where things look at the end of June, and who knows. The thing I would say about that is that registering for Mythmoot is a low-risk proposition. Needless to say, we're going to be very freely refunding people who have purchased tickets and can't end up coming even at the last minute and for whatever reason, really. So, no concerns about that. We're going to be doing complete refunds for folks. I think we'll have to keep like a couple bucks to cover the fees and stuff, but it's very, it's like a 99% refund on Mythmoot tickets. So anyway, that just to let you know that as of now still happening. Nick, a remote Mythmoot is a possibility. If we do end up having to cancel, it's certainly something we'll think about. I have to say I have been very resistant to planning a remote moot or replacing any of our moots with remote gatherings. Not, of course, because I have anything against synchronous online remote gatherings, but because that's what we do every day. Like the whole point of moots is that they're different from our normal broadcast thing. And we can do it, but like, it's just, it's not the same. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Yeah. Actually, Mike, you are right. If we, when we do reschedule the moots, we will definitely have to call them remoots. I completely agree with you about that. So, anyhow, we will see what happens. But for now, as of now, we are still planning on Mythmoot happening, and we'll see. The other thing that I did want to draw your attention to is Signum's online teaching mentorship program. This is something that we've put together just in the last couple weeks here at Signum. We know a lot of people are teaching online, and I know, I've got friends who are, teaching in local schools here, who are teaching online with very little in the way of support or guidance, and kind of learning by trial and error as they go. And I know people are doing a really good job and really sort of working through things. But at Signum, of course, we've been doing synchronous online education for, more than 10 years, and would be really happy to help folks. A lot, in the very first wave, when people first started teaching online, here a couple weeks back, the main thing that everyone was focused on was like how to use the software, right? And most of the training programs that I know of, again, from friends, and hearing from friends and friends of friends, most of the training that people have been getting through their schools, when they were getting any, has been tech training, basically, for like how to use the software, which is great. It's important, don't get me wrong. But there's a lot more to it than that. And in particular, the process, it's one thing to say we're going to hold online sessions for a couple weeks, but if you're looking at, between now and the end of the year, you've got to deliver all of your curriculum and achieve your learning goals for the next couple months, online, taking those goals that you already had set and, coming through on those in your new online medium. That kind of conversion is non-trivial. Online education is awesome. I'll be the first one to tell you that, but I'll also acknowledge it isn't the same thing as teaching in the classroom. And so the ways that one designs lessons and thinks through teaching and student interactions, it's not the same. Different things work better in the online environment. So we're offering this mentorship service in which basically, either I or one of our other Signum folks will come and meet with the folks, not virtually. We'll virtually meet, of course, with your people, like the teachers in your department, or the people at your school, or it can be non-school groups like churches and stuff like that as well, just to kind of help you think through, listen to you guys explain your own goals and the things and the challenges that you're facing, and help you think through what are some good approaches to doing this. How can you best accomplish your teaching goals online? So anyway, that's the goal of the mentorship program. We do have to charge a little bit for it because it takes time, a good chunk of time from our people, but we're offering it at cost as cheap as we possibly can, because we really want to be able to make the service available to as many people as possible. We are offering it for both groups, for like departments and schools and churches and things, whole teams, and we're also offering it for individuals at a much lower rate. So anyway, just wanted to share that that's happening, and encourage you to talk, if you're a teacher, to talk to your principal or to your department chair or whatever, and see if maybe you guys can take advantage of this, because it's we'd love to help folks. So all right. Those are the announcements. And again, you can find that at signumuniversity.org/mentorship. All right. So season 5. All right. So the scope of season 5, the one thing that we know already, because we've been talking about this for a while, as indeed
Did we do the review already? Did I miss the review?
Well, that's kind of involved with this, really.
Okay.
We'll do that in the context of this. The thing that we know is where we're going to end, right? That's usually the first thing that we've had to debate, right? Is like, where are we going to end? And this one was easy, right? The duel between Fingolfin and Morgoth is going to be the end of the final episode. That's
sort of obvious here, isn't it?
Yeah. That one's pretty clear. Up to the, and really, like, the Dagor Braga Locke is one of those, like, sort of like epoch defining moments, right? That the idea of having that be the transition point between one season and the next was always pretty clear. So that's, that's sort of been the plan. So we're looking at 146 years of the sun, according to the Silmarillion chronology, that we're going to be covering during the course of season 5. So season 4 ended with the attack of Glaurung and the marriage of Celeborn and Galadriel. those were the two major events of the final episode. We also did have like shots, like the Gondolindrim moved in, right? So we had Gondolin established and the doors closed of Gondolin. We of course built up Nargothrond as well. So the discovery and the message, the dream, the discovery, and the building of Nargothrond and Gondolin were both of them major features of the second half of season 4. Of course, the kind of internal drama of Galadriel and her developing relationship with Celeborn, culminating in their wedding in the final episode, was one of the major arcs of the entire season in season 4. The front half of the season especially was focused on the drama of discovery, right? As the Sindar and especially Thingol, of course, were discovering the truth about the kinslaying, right? The facts about the kinslaying. And of course, the bad guys also discovering this and helping to foment trouble among the elves by this. We also, of course, began the elf catch and release program, right? We have elves being kidnapped and brought in and enslaved. We saw some of them working in the mines. We had our first major character who was captured, reconditioned, put under the spell of bottomless dread, and re-released, both to her own harm and the harm of her loved ones, setting the stage for the kind of even deeper distrust and uncertainty and chaos that Morgoth and Sauron are going to be fomenting as we move forward here, especially, I think, through season 5. By the time we get post-Dagor Braga Locke, it's still going to be an issue, but they're a little less covert after they, meaning the bad guys, are a little less covert after they've already, conquered half of Beleriand. So, anyway, so we ended, of course, the teaser at the end. The final scene of the final episode was Finrod stumbling upon Beor and his men. I was a little hesitant about that, kind of wanting to save. I didn't want to sort of spoil that, and I wanted to save the discovery. Part of me wanted to save the discovery, at least like Finrod's role, to the beginning of this season instead. But what really won me over was the suggestion, and I'm forgetting whose suggestion it was, that we have basically we end season 5 with the whole thing from Finrod's perspective, as he sees the men and he comes in and he grabs the harp and he starts playing, and we just have them wake up and be amazed, and then we cut after that. And when we return at the beginning, to men in season 5, we return to it essentially from their point of view, right? When they wake up from their sleep and they see this elf lord playing their harp, so that we sort of redo the whole thing from their point of view. And I thought that was a really cool idea. So seemed to me worth it to kind of do that scene twice in that way. Now, Chris Graham says we should open episode 1 with a flashback to the rising of the sun, so we can the first rising of the sun, so we can witness the awakening of men. That's a really good question. So we decided in season 4 that we were going to give several teasers that would suggest what was happening with men out in the east, out at Hildorian and elsewhere, how Melkor left Angband and went out east and, brought the most of the men out there to worship him and everything. The sort of primary, maybe he was absent. Morgoth was personally absent through most of season 4. But we did have that one shot when we got the eclipse in episode 9 or something like that. The eclipse of the sun. And we did cut at the end of that episode to the spectacle of Morgoth darkening the sun and all of the men bowing down and worshiping him, as he is sort of using that as a miracle to demonstrate his godhood to them. So we gave some indicators about what was happening, but we decided that we were not going to track that. We wanted to leave exactly what happened with Sauron and the men in the east a little bit of a mystery because, of course, when the men show up here in season 5, they're not going to know exactly what happened. They're going to only have some ancient stories about what occurred there. And yes, exactly, Stephen, and them reluctant to talk about what they do know about their past. Exactly. So yeah. Okay. So the concept that we had discussed in season 4 was starting season 5, episode 1, with that meeting from the men's perspective, and focusing on the human side of things for a while. And then, of course, we end with Fingolfin and Morgoth and the death of Fingolfin. And I would think, of course, the rescue of Fingolfin's body by Thorondor and the bearing away of his body and its burial by Turgon. So, there we have some excellent sort of elegiac moments for us to offer. It doesn't it sort of scream out for a kind of montage of mourning at the end, right? To see like all of the people weeping for the various people who are dead by the end of that by the end of that thing, by the end of that, by the end of the battle, by the end of the episode.
That thing.
So yeah, that thing,
By the end of that thing.
Yeah, that's it.
Montage of mourning. That's good.
Montage of mourning. That's it. Lots of people weeping and sad music.
Phil, it's dirge time.
Dirge time. Yes, we definitely need, mournful music, but I think, not just sad. Do we want to have, can we, it'll be a really fun opportunity, I think, for Philip to work a lot of the themes that he's been developing, right? Things like the Doom theme and the Fall theme, but also some of the Hope stuff in there as well. Lots of really cool opportunities there, I think. And I don't know, Marie was just asking about the theme. Yeah, I would think... So Phil, and for those of you who don't know, I'm speaking here to the person who's not here, but who will be listening later on. Philip Menzies, our Film composer, who has been composing our themes and our scores for Film and doing such a wonderful job. And so I would say, Phil, we're gonna need like an Unnumbered Tears theme, right?
Oh yeah,
like a theme which will be revealed in full at the Near Ninth Arnoidiad, perhaps. But just the themes of sorrow, and that should be that should definitely be something that sorry, accidentally hitting keys and moving through slides. That's not good. Anyway, yeah. So maybe this moment here at the end of this season is a time to kind of unveil the new sorrow theme. Do we have a sorrow theme? I don't think we do. I sometimes forget which themes he's already done. I know last season we called for one that he'd already made, for instance. But it just shows Phil is always anticipating our every desire, right? So there we go. Okay. So as our slide asks at the end here, we know where we're starting and we know where we're ending. Those are a given. So we got to figure out what happens in the middle. So let's talk about the middle. All right. Here are things that need to happen. And as you can see, there's a lot of fine print on this page because
some really small font.
There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen. So squint and I'll read it. But in any case, okay. So
we're trying to cram it all in.
Yeah. These are grouped into 4 categories. So we've got the storylines of the men, right? We've got the 3 houses entering Beleriand, forming various allegiances with the elves. We need hero stories for the four sort of kind of elder statesmen of those, right? Elder statespersons, I should say, as half of them are female. And of course, notice how we do not have to invent female characters here because half of them are already women. And these are Beor, Haleth, Hador Lorendal, that is Hador Goldenhead, and Endreth. Really important character for those of you who are unfamiliar with Endreth. She is a character invented later. She's not in the published Silmarillion. She's a character who was invented by Tolkien later on in the time after he'd written The Lord of the Rings. She appears in the sort of essay / short story that Tolkien wrote called The Athrobeth, Endreth, and Finrod. And it is the debate, basically, more like dialogue, between Endreth and Finrod. So Endreth, wise woman of the men, talks with Finrod Felagund, and they have. It's an altogether remarkable piece. The Athrobeth is one of my very favorite pieces. I mean, it would be in my very short list of pieces of like my favorite Tolkien pieces, like, of all time. It's in volume 10 of the History of Middle-earth, Morgoth Spring, which, by coincidence, we are discussing right now in Mythgard Academy on Wednesday nights at 10 p.m. So we'll be getting to the Athrobeth in a couple months, about a month and a half to 2 months here from now. So sometime in end of May, beginning of June, we'll be talking about the Athrobeth in Mythgard Academy. So I recommend if you wanna read along and join in with that discussion, that would be great. But anyway, okay, so those are the four first characters that we need, and then we have some other characters who are named and whom we're going to want to integrate in some ways. Amlach, and he's especially important. He's the really interesting one. He's opposed. So you may remember, and of course I'm trusting that all of you Silmarillion scholars have reread the section of the Silmarillion that season 5 is based on in anticipation of season 5. We've got about 3 chapters there, from the chapter called Of Maiglin through Of the Ruin of Doriath and the Death of Fingolfin that's basically the season 5 stuff. And anyhow, so Amlach is the one who is opposed. They have their big debate about whether they should stay in Beleriand or whether they should just turn back around and go. And Amlach is the one who's initially opposed to staying, but he's the one who's not there, and somebody impersonates him at the debate, at the council meeting, right? And then he comes afterwards and discusses it and was like, I was never there. And then he swears fealty. Oh, did I say Doriath? Sorry, the ruin of Beleriand, and the death of Fingolfin, not the ruin of Doriath. That's a later chapter, of course. Sorry, my apologies. Thank you for catching that, Marie. Anyway, Amlach ends up then entering the service, if I'm remembering correctly, of Maedhros. So he has an interesting little story. Marach, and Malach.
By the way, I think we can make some real hay with that storyline.
Oh yeah, that storyline needs to happen, right? I mean, it's pretty cool. I totally agree with that. It can
be like a kind of a weird, creepy sort of horror or thriller type storyline, just like kind of like, a little side story in the middle of kind of the more epic fantasy stuff that we're doing. I'm excited about that one.
Yeah, definitely. And it really follows on well with a lot of the kind of intrigue and espionage stuff that we were already doing in season 4, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we've established Sauron and Thuringwethil as like the super spy intelligence gathering mess with people with the elves' heads, team there. So lots of opportunity for us to work that. Mike Hockstad says he's got a notion to greatly expand on Amlach and impersonations, making a major subplot. I think that'd be really cool. Definitely open to those suggestions there. Yeah, Stephen and Tony are both suggesting that the impersonator could be Sauron himself. I think that's very very likely. That seems to me a very fruitful line and possibility there. So yeah, totally we need to do that. Marek and Malak, those are the ones who led that group of people over, but they don't really do very much, so they're kind of a little bit fungible, I think. There's Bereg, Magor, Haldad, and Haldar, who are, of course, the father and brother of Haleth, who both of whom famously die, so that Haleth has to become heroic and take over. Boromir and Bregalas, who are people between Beor, the head of that line, and then Barahir and Beren. And of course, we've got Barahir. We need to have Barahir, who is the father of Beren, and of course, who needs to famously rescue Finrod, so that Finrod can swear his oath to him, which ends up leading him to help Beren. So yeah, there's a bunch of folks. One of the things that I want to think about, we don't have to talk about this yet. We're going to come back to talking about the men in more detail later on, but I've floated this idea before, and I would like to float it again. We need to think about our time frames, of course, and what other things we need to accomplish as far as the passage of time is concerned in this season. But I personally would advocate some condensation here. I think I would like to get rid of some intervening generations of folks, because I don't think we need to introduce everybody. I especially people that we don't really have. Basically, the principle is simple. We're going to have a whole bunch of men that we have stories for, and whose stories are really impactful in the both in the story as a whole, and setting up future things, and whose interactions with the elves are really important as far as, therefore, the characters and storylines we've already established. We need to focus on those stories that we're telling and not just complete the genealogies for the sake of being completionists about the genealogies, I think. So folks like Boromir and Bregalas, I'm ready to be like, I have an idea. What about like Barahir being like the son or grandson of Beor? Can we do that? Like, is that all right? Do we need the intervening generations? This would mean if we did this, and like similarly, like let's have Hodor Goldenhead be involved earlier on, and then just move straight from him, as is in fact true that Hurin is the grandson of Hodor. Let's just go, and or maybe even the son. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to go crazy, just shortening for the sake of shortening. But again, like, we need to enable ourselves to focus on the stories we want to tell and the characters we want to develop. And if that means shortening the whole time frame, I think I'm fine with that. We'll see as we go through. Maybe something will come up that'll remind me of something else that we need. But I really don't think that there's too much that's happening in Elf World that is in our elf plot lines, which necessitates a whole bunch of time. I think if we compress the timeline a little bit for the sake of trimming off a few extraneous human generations, I don't think the elvish storylines are going to suffer much. Do you guys have any quick thoughts about that?
Not me. I mean, I actually see the logic in that. I mean, if we vote, I would vote to like consider that definitely to compress generations.
Yeah, I mean it's there may be some difficult choices to make. Some of them, again, I don't think are going to be that difficult, honestly. Like, okay, like I understand. Stephen and Marie are both saying Bregalas is present at the Dagor Braga Locke and is killed in action. We can't get rid of him. Yeah, we can. We just got to replace him, right? But okay, let's say, for instance, Beor, one of the things about Beor, one of the defining elements of Beor's character is he's old, right? So fine. Let's not make him let's make him the granddad. Let's put a generation in between. What if we got Beor, right? Grandpa Beor. And then we can keep one of them, right? One of those in between. And then so Barahir is the grandson of Beor. So we've got Bari here, the grandson of Beor, and Beren, the great-grandson of Beor. And that gives us a bonus generation so that we have a superfluous dad who can die in the Dagor Braga Locke. Done, right? No problem. So, there are ways around some of these kinds of issues. But anyway, I just... But again, do we need the multiples there? Not really sure that we do. So, and honestly, if I have to get rid of, what about this? What about this? Can we just replace Braga Locke? Seriously, is anyone personally attached to Braga Locke? He barely gets a mention. Like, we're told literally nothing about him except that he dies, right? So that means like literally anybody named anything could die instead. Like, we just need a dude to die, right? Like in the line of Beren leaving Bari here, right? Okay, but maybe it could be Boromir because of the name, right? That'd be kind of fun, right? But it's okay. We can cut Boromir if you want to cut Boromir. We can sort it out. Anyway, we'll come back when we discuss the storylines of the men in more detail later on. I just wanted to float the idea because I know nobody likes to change things from the text, but I'm really feeling that our storylines are going to be, I mean, as you see the size of the font on this page, our storylines are going to be out of control as it is, right? We're gonna need ways to make this more efficient if we're gonna actually be able to, tell compelling stories there.
We gotta compress, folks. We gotta compress.
I really think, with these early generations of men, and I know, like, some of you are saying, well, like, we don't have to actually change it. We can just kind of skip over it. Sure, we can. But you know what? This is what hurts people's heads about the Silmarillion in the first place. Why should we go out of our way to keep that? It's fine. It's like, it's fine. It's fine. But we'll see. We'll see. Let's just hang on to that. I just wanted to throw out the idea. Mention that just to warn you that I'm going to be thinking about that. Ways in which we can focus on the stories and probably condense and focus on that a little bit. Okay. All right. Elf stories. Fingolfin's life work of the siege, an unsuccessful attempt to rally the Noldor for an offensive action culminating in despair. So Fingolfin's story arc really needs to be one of the dominant elf story arcs of the entire season, right? If there's going to be a single elf whose character and story carries the elf side of this story, it's got to be Fingolfin, right? In order to give us maximum payoff with his duel and death at the end of the season. We definitely need to spotlight that. And the siege is his baby, right? We are going to protect Middle-earth by setting Morgoth in leaguer, and we can do this, right? We can protect everybody. We can hold him in, even if we can't defeat him. His desire and attempt his desire and attempt to do an offensive, like his perception that we probably shouldn't just wait for Morgoth to finish making whatever plans he's making. We should maybe strike while we're strong and perhaps he's weaker. Yes. And then, of course, how he's going to be convinced not to do that, and then how that's going to be disaster. The overall arc of Fingolfin is going to be tragic over the course of this year, and we need to be tending to that and setting that up. So clearly, that's a really, really big thing. We have tragic romance number 1. Aravel leaving Gondolin, meeting Eol, and giving birth to Maeglin. Now, this is the one element where when I was saying before that there's not much among the elf storylines that really necessitates having a long having a full 146 years or whatever for this season. The Mogollon storyline is the only possible exception to that, because he's got to be old enough. I think that we can. I think we can be okay there. Even if we do shorten the time frame, I think we can be okay. But in my mind, the time frame of that is going to be the biggest concern, because we're going to have first the story of Arthel leaving Gondolin and why she wants to leave, and we've already been talking about that and setting that up quite a bit in the second half of season 4 with her farewell tour that we gave her, and her basically her rationale, her uncertainty about whether or not the Gondolin plan was a good plan, and her rationale for going along with it and supporting it and accompanying Turgon to Gondolin in the last place there at the end of season 4. We need to get her to the point of leaving, and the primary thing we'd already talked about there, and what we were trying to set up so carefully last season, was we do not want Arthel merely to sound like a bored debutante in Gondolin, right? Like she's just a socialite who is suffering from ennui and wants to leave and can't handle it. So that's what we've been setting up, and I think that's fine. Marie, that seems to me very sensible. Marie says she thinks we probably have about 50 years of flex room if we wanted to condense. I agree. I do think the whole Arthel plot from Arthel has some time to start becoming discontented with how things are going in Gondolin, and then leaves and finds Eol, conceives and bears Mogollon, and then Mogollon grows up to the point where he wants to come back. Part of the work there can be done by having Mogollon still be quite young. I'm not saying look like a 6-year-old, but he can look like a 16-year-old. Basically, I know he won't actually be 16 years of the sun old, because elves age differently than humans, but I'm saying he can be at about that stage, I think. We can have Mogollon the moody teenager at the end. I do not think Mogollon has to be full grown at that point. So I think that we can't shorten it too much, or else we're going to either hasten her discontent uncomfortably, or we're gonna make Mogollon uncomfortably young. Right, exactly, Marie. I was thinking that too. Marie is estimating that getting Mogollon to like the moody, pimply, discontented stage would probably not take more than 30 years of his life. Yeah. Chris, that to me is sort of the horrifying idea of elvish lifespans, that they have extended adolescences. I mean, I cannot imagine an adolescence that lasts decades. I mean, that seems to me like, why would you need purification in the halls of Mandos if you've had to endure 3 decades of adolescence already, right? And for everyone else around you, to be perfectly honest. So, but yes, that would be extended. So anyhow, but yeah, so that whole story. Now I see that Stephen was wanting me to put quotation marks around romance for Eol and Arthel. Yes, and I know Nick was already expressing his discomfort with the Eol and Arthel story, and it is going to be uncomfortable. I have thoughts, but we'll get to those later on. Finrod, of course, we are going to need Finrod to befriend the House of Beor. This is going to begin with Finrod and Beor meeting in episode 1, right? So we're going to have Finrod and Beor meeting at the beginning of episode 1, and we're going to, honestly, at the end of last season, and then we're going to have Barahir rescuing Finrod on the battlefield near the end, right, of the season. So one thread that's going to be going through is Finrod, not only as particularly friends of the House of Beor, but Finrod as friends of humanity, one of the chief friends and advocates of the humans in Beleriand and in general. This is going to be one of the things that really sets Finrod apart from a lot of the other elves. So, anyway, that's definitely something we're going to have to be looking at. And then, yes, establishing also the connections, but like the House of Hador, and they're moving in to Hithlum, right? And going to serve Fingon and Fingolfin up there in the northwest. Of course, we're going to have the story of Umlach, as we said, the guy who's has his doppelganger speak at the council. And of course, Endrith, who will be over there too, and Haleth, obviously, who's going to be doing her own thing. Haleth is, I have to say, if there's one single character I am most interested in season 5, it is Haleth, actually. I think she is going to be really, really fun. And one of the things that I am really looking forward to is figuring out what stories we can give her. I say that because Haleth is given a prominent role in like the history, right? As a leader. But she's not given many stories. If you see the difference, right? Like what we're told about her in the Silmarillion is like how her people loved her and served her until the end of her life, and like would follow her anywhere, even though some of them were like, dude, this is too much for us. But many of them stuck with it and followed her, and like through her own force of will brought her people to and how cheeky she is to elf lords all over the place, right? Haleth is somebody who doesn't take any guff off of any elf king, right? No matter what. But yeah, Nick, we get almost no detail, right? We get detail about the very first thing, about the death of her father and brother, and then when she, and her own survival in that first battle. But apart from that, we're just told like geopolitical stuff about Haleth, right? And then she led her people over to this other area. And then after being there for a while, she then led her people over again to another place through many hardships. That's the kind of thing that those are in stories, right? That's mentions she's significant, but and we get these tantalizing glimpses of an awesome character, but we don't really get much. Yeah, Nick nominates Haleth for the Deep Space Nine style spin-off from the film project, and that seems to me entirely right. So anyway, I'm really interested to see how can we do more with Haleth? What kind of stories can we involve her in? And honestly, one of the other reasons why I am interested, just to kind of put my chips on the table at the beginning, one of the reasons in which I advocate condensing and eliminating some of the generations is to spread the wealth a little bit. And to give some of those characters who are named and important, but who don't get to do very much, like Hador. Hador Goldeneye, what does he do? He goes to Fingon and like swears fealty and is called Peer of Elf Lords, which is cool. Why is he called that? What did he do? I don't know. Under what circumstances did he get a name that means Peer of Elf Lords, right? We don't know. We're never told, right? He's cool. He's a legendary figure, but we don't get any stories, actual stories about Hador, right? So I would kind of like to take the stuff that men are involved in and kind of both develop but also concentrate the coolness into some of these cool characters and give them a chance to really sort of blossom here. Anyway, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Corey,
yeah.
I have a
ahead.
question
Yeah.
on the men. So I'm wondering, like, how many episodes can on a show like this, where we're focused on the elves and we're operating on an elf time scale, how many episodes can a human character last?
Right. Well, I mean, it's gonna depend on It's going to depend on what we do with the timescale, right? I mean, let's just take, Marie, just throwing out there the number that you said. 146 is the actual years in the book here. And if we take Marie's suggestion and trim off maybe 50, right? So say we're doing the whole thing in 100 years. The whole season is 100 years from beginning to end. Obviously, we don't have to split up the time equally in every episode, of course. Like, thinking of the ways in which... So, okay. Here's my approximation. If we essentially have... It seems to me that we have kind of two really important groups of characters, right? We've got the first generation important people, Beor, Hollis, Hador, right? And we've got the second generation really important people, like Bara here, right? I would lump Endris into the second generation instead of the first. I'd put her in the second generation. It'd fit her a little easier there. If we think about the older and the younger generation, that would fit with, of course, one of the shapes that our seasons have often had on film have been sort of split into two halves with a pivot in the middle, right? Think of particularly the most dramatic version of that we had was season 2, right? Where the first half of season 2 was from Cuivianen to the arrival in Valinor. So we had elves and the progress across Middle-earth as they were setting sail for Valinor. And then we had a bunch of time passes, and we had the second half of the season from the release of Melkor and the unrest of the Noldor in the second half of the season. And of course, Dave, we even introduced a new generation of characters there, right? The younger generation of elves came about, were there as characters in the second half of the season, but they weren't in the first half. So we've even done something kind of like that with our elf characters in the previous years, and that's kind of what I'm thinking. That we could do something like that, focus something like the first half of the season on the older generation, the first wave of men, and the establishment of men there in Middle-earth and their relationship with the elves and their different storylines and their different kindreds. And then we could skip a little bit of time and come back to, Bara here and Endris and others, that we would need. I mean, I'm saying those two, we might want to keep touching base with the people of Hollis there as well. People of Hollis kind of fall off the map. That's another problem. Well, not problem. I'm not saying it's wrong in the Silmarillion or bad in the Silmarillion. I'm just saying we don't like... Are there any named characters from the House of Hollis until we get to, Hurin and Huor? I don't think so. We skip a lot, right? Yeah, I know there's family tree, but that's it. Apart from the family tree, that's all we get. So anyway, we could...
I'm also wondering...
Yeah. So go ahead.
I wonder if there's an opportunity to do like a slightly different kind of storytelling with the human characters, where like basically they just get one really strong episode, sort of like basically I guess the parlance would be a bottle episode.
Right.
Like they just get one really strong one episode where it's like we just focus on this character and we tell their story end to end in a single episode.
We could definitely... I could see Hollis' story being like that. It's not like she'd only be in one episode.
Right.
But she seems a strong candidate for that kind of treatment, to have this, one episode which is like the Hollis is awesome episode, and then
she has some cameos.
Right. Yeah, and she can be involved in sort of the general story in other places, but we have one episode which is totally like from focused on her from beginning to end. We could definitely do that. I'm not saying we need to do that, but we could definitely do that. We'll see. Nick, I agree. We are going to have lots of other storylines going. So we'd have to be a little selective with that. I think that we could afford to do that maybe once or twice, but we'll see. We'll see. Okay. Then we've got Endris. Back to elf plot lines. So Endris is here, of course, because we have our second tragic romance of season 5, Aignor and Endris, our first ever elf-human love affair, which ends tragically because it is tragic, of course, because if you don't know the story, and again, no reason why you would, even if you've just read the Silmarillion, because it's only just sort of told in the notes around the end of the Athrobeth, that Endris and Aignor are in love mutually. This is a requited love on both sides, but Aignor can't/won't marry her because it's a time of war. And just like, so for various reasons, like he feels that it is not right for them to be together. And so their love is requited, but unconsummated. And they are forlorn and desolate. And then he dies in the Dagor Braga Locke. So one of the ironies, which I think we absolutely have to play on, right? I mean, one of the issues being the first time we are ever going to raise the question of an elf-human love relationship, the question has got to be like, oh, how is that going to work with an immortal, guy and his mortal lover? She's going to grow old and die, and he's going to outlive her. And of course, the irony, she's going to outlive him by decades. So there's a horrible, painful irony to the end of their story there at the end. But I don't know. I kind of, sorry, tipped my hand there. I know she dies there then as well. I don't know. We'll see. I am sort of suggesting that we consider shifting the chronology there and having her survive the Dagor Braga Locke. But we don't have to. I'm not wedded to that. I'm just saying, I think it would be, especially if we kind of think about the human stories in the way that I was like the first wave and the second wave, right? And if Endris is in the second wave, she'd have to die relatively young. I mean, we'd have to let her be relatively young, or again, be messing around a bunch with time. I kind of like I do like leaning into that irony there, Marie, and having her be the bereaved semi-non-widow, right? Functional widow of Aignor. Anyway, I think there's a lot of potential there. So we'll see. I again, not insisting, not decreeing, just spitballing ideas for that storyline. Rihanna and I agree. We do not need to show the death of Endris in age. Simply showing, I mean, an aging, grieving Endris could simply be part of our montage of mourning right at the end. Anyway, we'll see. We'll get to details of that later on. But this is a major thing. And so, by the way, notice that this also enables for a balanced shape, right? If we get Eol and Aredhel and the uncomfortable and tragic and ugly in various ways romance of the first half of the season, and then the beautiful but tragic romance of Aignor and Endris in the second half of the season, those two can then also be kind of playing off each other in some sorts of interesting ways, I think, too, with the parallel structure that we're establishing there. So again, several things are kind of inclining me towards, that sort of, diptych structure of this season that we've done before, and which I think could work pretty well. We have, of course, the plot line of the Green Elves' unfriendship with the men when they cross over. So we're going to have to do some work here. This, by the way, seems to be, and connecting this to the next question, the question of Galadriel and Celeborn's honeymoon. Are they still out and about? Where do we meet with them, and how often? I was going to suggest the Green Elves as a place there because, of course, we have Celeborn's sister as one of the unofficial leaders of the anarcho-syndicalist commune that is the Green Elves. And so the issue of their unfriendship to the elves is a thing that Galadriel and Celeborn can be kind of at least observers of, or even in some ways caught in the middle of, and that would be interesting. Brian, Brian says it might be fun to have Andreth still around and playing some minor role, even in the Baron and Luthien season, have her survive, and have there be some way in which she's still involved in the story in some way, in season 6. I agree. I'm definitely game for that kind of thing.
Also, I don't know if we've decided what it's going to be yet, but the Hollis story or the Endris story could also be part of the frame narrative.
Yeah. Well,
it would be a storytelling thing. In other words, it would be a looking back history lesson kind of thing. So it could actually span the two. It could span the story, and then some PS postscripts or something. I don't know. Anyway,
it would be interesting to kind of play around with the relationship with the frame and see how we could kind of work that. Yeah. Ooh, Maria's thinking about seeing Andreth as the one who passes on Narsil, because remember, Narsil is Ignor's sword. So, and it's got to, he's going to die, but it needs to survive, obviously. So, if she is the transmitter and the one who hands on Narsil, that would be, if she is the way that Narsil gets into the hands of men, and so it will eventually be passed down. Kind of cool. Okay. Yeah, Chris, that would be interesting to think about. Chris Graham is thinking about there's an opportunity with the men in Osirian and the relationship with the Green Elves for us to play with the kind of sort of fairy framework, which is so common, of course, in Tolkien stories. So having this sense of entering fairy and how, in more than one sense, perhaps Osirian seems like a perilous realm when they enter into it. It's not only because they might catch an arrow in the face when they, go about their business hunting and hunting beasts and hewing trees. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah. And Marie, I agree. We'll have a whole session in which we talk about the frame. So I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. But yeah, we can definitely think about that sort of thing, Trish. Okay. Right. Okay. So that's it for elf plots. Dwarves. We had said last season that we did not want to leave the dwarves entirely behind. We would like to continue building some of the dwarf storylines. The chief dwarf storylines of season 4 were focused on forging stuff, especially Narsil and the Dragon Helm, and on Nargothrond, of course, and the eviction of the petty dwarves and the gift of Nargothrond to Finrod and the careful management of that situation. Those were our dwarf storylines in season 4. And to be honest, there are very few necessary dwarf storylines between then and now. The dwarves still need to be involved with Eol and Maeglin, right? Maeglin is going to learn from the dwarves, so we get at least some cameo dwarf appearances there, or dwarven realms appearances in the first half of the season. But there are very few moments when the dwarves are really kind of front and center within the Silmarillion text stories here. And Marie, I agree. We've had 2 primary dwarf characters that we've been very interested in our storylines in season 3 and 4. Norn, the dwarf ambassador to the Sindar, and Telkar the smith, of course, whom we decided should be female, and of course the one who forges Narsil, named in The Lord of the Rings. And yeah, they're both dead. Now, we had both of them dying of old age in season 4. Anyway, yeah, I know Nick has been a particular advocate of getting more dwarvish stuff happening. So suggestions for dwarvish storylines. Nogrod forms an alliance with Nargothrond, and Xerox makes the Nauglamir. So the Nauglamir is one other brief dwarven touch, right, on this time period when Finrod sends off a bunch of his jewels to be made into the Nauglamir. Obviously, from a dwarf standpoint, the Nauglamir is not a minor storyline. The Nauglamir is a very big deal to the dwarves. And in my mind, Nick, that's the biggest thing to focus on, right? My biggest thought there is that if we could emphasize in season 5, if we could find some ways to emphasize that, like, although the absolute value of these things is not as high, the parallel still kind of works. Something like Silmarils are to the elves as the Nauglamir is to the dwarves, essentially. I mean, to emphasize this is not just, you know, some fancy piece of bling that the dwarves really like when they try to, you know, haggle with Thingol over that later on, right? It is a huge, big deal to the dwarves. The Nauglamir would be something. This is meant to be one of the greatest work of dwarven craftsmanship ever. Like the Silmarils. Again, not that the Nauglamir is on exactly the same plane as the Silmarils, but it's a very, very big deal. And so I can imagine storylines that we could develop involving Finrod, involving the dwarves, even the dwarves among themselves. Nick, I think it would be pretty funny. It would be almost Easter egg like, right? If we have a bunch of storylines, but they just don't involve elves, right? So the elves never learn about it, so it never makes it into the published Silmarillion, right? But like, what the Silmarillion says really simply, right? That Finrod had these gems crafted and they gave him the Nauglamir, right? We get, like, in one paragraph, in like a couple sentences, we get the story of the Nauglamir in the published Silmarillion. What if, like, behind and beneath that, like, one sentence reference is like this whole story of, like, civil war and, like, treachery and because wouldn't they, like, they would make it and they'd want to keep it, and there'd be debates about, like, are they going to cause war with the elves if they don't give it back to Finrod, and some dwarves wanting it and others not, and so there'd be a lot going on there potentially, right? Even action scenes and fights, or even a minor war between Nogrod and Belagast, perhaps. It's the kind of thing we know happens between dwarven houses. What if something like that was going on behind the scenes or under the mountains, and the elves just they don't even ever know about it? And so again, that's why it doesn't make it in the published Silmarillion. Exactly, Mike. Think of the opportunities we have for a parallel to the kinslaying, right? Pursuing that parallel a little bit, not just trying to elaborate a parallel for the sake of the parallel, but raising the issue again in some new and fresh ways, right? The question of the love of the work of one's hands and the desire for beautiful things, and the the willingness to slay one's kin, and all of these other things. So I'm just saying there's some material there, I think. Yeah, let's see. And of course we've got Belagost seen from the point of view of Eol and Maegwyn. Now, Marie points out that we've mentioned Nogrod, but we've not really been involved with Nogrod most. We've been very Belagost centric because that's where Telkar was and that's where Norn came from. So our two primary dwarf characters were both Belagostian. So this gives us an opportunity to introduce a whole new set of dwarves and then maybe introduce some conflict. So just saying, that could be interesting to kind of work some of that stuff. Would be interesting to see if any folks either on our discussion boards or among our plot team are interested in kind of running with a dwarf subplot. We'd have to be careful because it can't take over, right? I mean, we can't have it coming to dominate the entire season, but you know, there's definitely some stuff there. Now, Rhiannon and Tony are both asking if we should involve Khazad-dûm. Part of me says, hey, why not? Part of me says maybe we don't want to burn through all of our assets in one spot, right? There's going to be a bunch of seasons in which we don't have a lot
early
of
days yet.
Yeah, it's early
Besides,
days.
I think we'll probably, I don't know if we will or not. I mean, one thing to consider, you know, like this season is, last season was elf season, this season's man season. We should probably have a season that's dwarf season.
Well, we'll certainly get there, though it's hard to see. Well, okay. The Ruin of Doriath is when we're going to get there. I mean, that's the next huge dwarf moment, right? Is that's the Ruin of Doriath. Yeah. I mean, Tony and Rhiannon, I think, have both suggested that we could bring Mithril into the
that's a good
Naglamir question, which would involve Khazad-dûm, not directly, right? Like not going to Khazad-dûm, but exactly, Rhiannon, a sort of visiting Longbeardian scholar who, and Smith, who can help them with Mithril, or even merchant, honestly. But anyway, we could think about that. Again, my thought is, yes, Marie, I'd rather name drop it in this season and work with it later on because, as I say, we've got a lot of ground we got a lot of seasons in which what are we going to do with the dwarves next season in the Baron and Luthien season, right? I mean, come on, there's nothing happened with dwarves in that season. So, so there's going to be a lot of times when we're going to have plenty of space to fill if we don't want to lose sight of dwarves. And so Nogrod is the our first big opportunity here. I mean, that's like our new frontier. We do have a big new dwarf frontier and kind of set of plot threads with some new Nogrodian dwarves. So that seems to me enough new dwarf business without getting into Moria also in this season. I was remembering the death of the heroic death of Azechal in the Near Ninth, of course. That's going to be another moment that we can play up in some good ways. But again, that's ways down the road. Okay. And what should the interactions with men be? Does the published Silmarillion tell us the first thing? Does it dedicate even a single syllable to telling us anything about relations between men and dwarves? Nope. I can't think of one. A syllable, that is, that suggests that. I think it depends on where we go with the dwarf plot. If our dwarf plot is going to be more kind of Balerian focused, if we're going to be focused more on like trading, traveling, and ambassador dwarves, then I think we're definitely going to want to do that. If we're focused on mostly internal dwarf politics and drama, then I would say probably not. We don't need to really go there necessarily. We'll see. I'm not saying that we need to put up a firewall between men and dwarves, but I don't see any storyline that screams out for it. But we'll see what we get to there. And finally, we have the villains. Mind, we're just I'm just still here enumerating storylines, right? That's all that's happening here so far. The catch and release program among the villains. So we got the villain storylines. The catch and release program. We need Rolgren was just captured at the end of season 4, so we need Rolgren's escape, and we need Anail's escape. And of course, we wanted to have Anail used as a sleeper agent and eventually be discovered and become a hermit. So those storylines definitely we need. What is the new plan from Sauron now that he's already tried it once and with some success, right? And of course, especially now that the boss is back, right? As Morgoth is back in town. And fake Amlach, yes, fake Amlach story is definitely one that has to end the whole doppelganger imposter thing going on. Sure. And of course, we've got the build up for the Dagor Braga Locke. Yep. Yeah, Nick is thinking it'd be nice to go back and give Glaurung a bit of explanation so that he's not just the monster of the week at the end of, we don't want Glaurung in his appearance in the previous episode. I mean, like the last episode of season 4 to look like, like the Watcher in the Water or something, right? A cool, scary monster who's never heard from again in the storyline. So yeah, getting a little bit more depth into who Glaurung is and what he's all about. So yes, a little backstory there. I definitely think that Glaurung, now that he's through his awkward adolescent period, right? Everybody's got an awkward adolescent period, and Glaurung had it, and he's done now. Now that Glaurung is older, wiser, and more evil, we can sort of have him inserting himself into Angband politics. In particular, I think that we can explore at least a little bit, where does Glaurung lie in the whole, Sauron Gothmog axis that we've been looking at throughout the show so far. Personally, if I had to suggest something there, I would suggest that he's basically a third player in that he sees both of them as his rivals, and he wants to now establish a plan to make himself the dominant force, which he is going to pretty much achieve, right? I mean, the day that Glaurung sacks Nargothrond, he's the top of the heap, right? Not only the top of the heap of Finrod's treasure, but he's the top of the heap in Angband. I mean, he is the Dragon King of Beleriand, almost at that point, at least most of Beleriand at that point. And of course, Sauron is already post-Luthien at that point. So anyway, yeah, there's stuff with Glaurung, definitely. Both backstory, perhaps, Nick, but also, showing his future stuff, which definitely we can work on. Yeah, Stephen Cover suggesting we bring him in like the under construction Death Star in Revenge of the Sith. So that's almost what we did do with him in season 4, but we'll see. Rihanna and I like the idea about him possibly helping to hypnotize Anail, helping to establish the force of Glaurung's own will and sort of psychic power is something that would be kind of nice to establish, I think. I don't know that we want to necessarily put Anail entirely into his zone, as it were, but it's something that we could certainly consider. As I say, setting him up for the actions he's going to be taking, right? So that we're ready. When what's her name? Nienor, like, comes up to the top of the hill, comes around the corner, and there's Glaurung's face just staring right into hers, right? We should know what that means, right? This should fill us with a horrible dread even before we see what he does. Anyway, yeah. Ooh, nice. Maria's pointing out how Sauron's relationship with Glaurung could also give sort of be an interesting, lay some interesting groundwork for Gandalf's fears about Sauron's relationship with Smaug, right? We could have him be an ally of Sauron's, and therefore show sort of in anticipation, so that again, when Smaug comes down and sacks Erebor, and Sauron's plans for setting himself up in Mordor again are almost complete, experienced film viewers will be full of rightful trepidation, knowing what could happen there. I like that. Yeah, good. You're right, Nick. Nick points out that except in our version, there was a scene where the Death Star shows up out of context to blow up a town. It's true. We had the Death Star still covered in scaffolding, running amok there for a little bit at the end of the season. But hey, it's in the text. Sorry, no, it's the other Steven. Steven Cover. I apologize. There are two of you here. Anyway, okay. Good. Yep. So plenty of stuff there. One of the things I am going to be interested in is to see Sauron and Morgoth's relationship developing over the course of the season. Because here's my thought there. We've been focusing on Gothmog versus Sauron. Now, I'm thinking that Gothmog, it's not like he's out of the picture, but I think that Gothmog is, by this point now, definitively losing the political fight with Sauron. I think it's pretty clear that Sauron is the one with good plans, and especially the way that we set up the Dagor Aglareb to be a black eye for Gothmog, right? That, that was his kind of disaster. And Sauron's plans about, the catch and release program are bearing fruit. And Morgoth clearly approves in the way that he comes in and is involved with the spell of bottomless dread at the end of the Etherloss story that we were establishing. So Sauron taking his place as more clearly and firmly the chief lieutenant of Morgoth. Again, if we show him now clearly in supremacy over Gothmog, and Gothmog sort of fading into the background as more just, he's just thug and the captain of the Balrogs and the one who leads them in battle, but he's no longer really of much account when it comes to planning and counsel and leadership now, though he still is going to be very resentful, of course, of Sauron.
And now he's falling even further in favor because now there's Glaurung.
There's Glaurung, right? He's going to be third fiddle instead of second fiddle now. Yes, exactly. I don't think that losing the active conflict between Sauron and Gothmog diminishes the drama of the bad guys, both because, Dave, as you say, we've got the interjection of Glaurung into the equation. But at the same time, also, we can focus instead on the dynamics between Sauron and Morgoth. With Morgoth gone last season, it was all about who's in charge and who's really driving this in Morgoth's absence and whose plans are better, right? And we kind of answered that question over the course of the season. So now the question is, well, the boss is back and I'm not in charge anymore. How do I handle that, right? Where are places that Morgoth and Sauron come into conflict, or where is there envy or rivalry between them? That could be something that I think would be sort of, we've already set that up. We prepared for that, right? With the orc issue that happened at the end of season 2 and that kind of thing, that we've already sort of set the stage for that a bit. Yeah, that's interesting, Marie. Thinking about Sauron and Gothmog kind of vying for Glaurung's loyalty, right, to have him throw in on their side, which also, of course, enables Glaurung to potentially manipulate both of them and try to get his own place. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, we are going to have Tony, as you say. No, wait. Wait, who is that? Nick. Nick was saying Sauron is, of course, going to be given command of the forward ops base, right? At Minas Tirith, which becomes Towering Gorholth. And of course, yeah, that's not going to end well, right? Sauron's role there. But that I would say as sort of a parallel to the Glaurung and Nargothrond moment that I was mentioning earlier, really the acme of Sauron's own political power in Beleriand is that moment, right? When he establishes himself ruling in what was Minas Tirith, in Finrod's tower, and he establishes his base, and he's basically ruling most of Beleriand, right? That I think is, yeah, definitely sort of his high watermark before Luthien takes him down. Yeah, good. Rhiannon points out that, of course, we don't want to tease the Dagor Braga Locke too much. We want it to be a surprise. That is the full extent of it and the nature of how it's planned. So by focusing on political tensions in the villain storylines, we are kind of distracting away from the building up of military strength and what Morgoth's final plans are for the Dagor Braga Locke. He might himself be kind of playing those close to the vest a little bit. Yeah. Now, Stephen has a great question about how much more powerful is Sauron than Gothmog. Right now, Sauron's record in one-on-one fights is pretty poor, and will be. I mean, give me a scene when Sauron kicks butt on the battlefield in the whole history of Arda. Right? I mean,
he's got a bad track record, doesn't he?
Yeah, not so good, right? He does a fair bit of surrendering, getting overthrown, getting cast down and looted. I mean, I'm not saying he's a complete wimp, but I'm just saying that we not much, right? We did give him a pretty good moment in the capture of Maedhros there, Nick, but even there, he's not exactly playing fair. Yeah. Marie was recalling that too. So no, I agree. I mean, it's now Tony points out that, to be fair, Morgoth himself doesn't have the greatest possible track record either, admittedly. In fact, Tony, I mean, one could easily argue that at the end of the day, when all the counters are in, Gothmog is probably going to have the best military record of any of the bad guys. He will have won several battles, actually. But yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I don't really think that Sauron necessarily need be a major military figure. I don't think it needs to be something that he specializes in. I think we've done a really good job of positioning him so that we show he's not just a bad commander or a weak fighter. It's not what he does, right? I mean, he's scarier because he gets you in other ways, right? He's able to manipulate you and corrupt you. He doesn't need to beat you up. So I'm totally fine with that. Okay. All right. I have an idea. Next slide. Woohoo. Okay, so let's get to the men, because there are all kinds of men all over the place here. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about these stories. We talked about these some but have I given you enough time to get used to the idea of compressing the timeline? Here are the storylines enumerated. Beor meets Finrod and agrees to go to Nargothrond. The encampment at Estolad, that is when the main bulk of the men cross the mountains and set up their encampment at the place which they cunningly name Encampment. Then we've got the fighting at Maglor's Gap, the death of Beor, of old age, right, which is a big deal because it's the first time that elves are introduced to mortality. Boromir leaves. There's clearly got to be like tourism, like elvish tourism, like come see the corpse of Beor. But anyway, Boromir moves to Ladros in Dorthonion. Andreth meets Aignor. Andreth as a young woman meets Aignor. Andreth as a middle-aged woman has her discussion with Finrod. The death of Andreth as an elderly woman, which maybe we save till season 6 or maybe we don't. The death of Bregalas in the Dagor Braga Locke, and Barahir saving Finrod in the Dagor Braga Locke. Okay. Of these storylines, so Tony is asking, would the elves have not dealt with mortal death with the dwarves? No. In fact, remember we were talking about that. Because Norn is old, right? We had him retiring and like wanting to conceal the mortality of the dwarves from the elves. So like the elves have never seen the dwarves die of old age. Norn went back, to spend more time with his grandkids and stuff, right? And they just never saw him again. So he just went into retirement, had some other things that he wanted to do.
That discussion I definitely remember, that we specifically said that would be one of the things that we feel pretty strongly, that dwarves would not be sharing with outsiders.
Yeah, exactly. And of course it enables us to have it be a fresh surprise to the elves with the men. And so
right.
Be a much more mortality be a human-oriented issue here.
Right. But also it also gives us the opportunity to present yet another point of view on mortality, where so we have one race that's not mortal, and then we have two that are, one that is and one that's kind of sort of is, and in the case of the kind of sort of is one, the dwarves, we have this kind of like secretive, like I don't recall exactly, I don't remember if we thought it was something that was shameful or if it was just something that they were very private about. But with men, I think men are going to wear it on their sleeves.
Right.
It's going to be something that they're going to like want to be constantly like talking to their elf buddies about. And the elves are just going to be like, "Why do you keep bringing this up?" And then we're like, "Yeah, but because it's always, because I think one thing that we for sure see in the Silmarillion is that it weighs on their minds. Right. Even more so when they meet the elves.
Exactly. No, I agree. I think that's a really good way to think about this. Okay, so thinking about these storylines, just these here in the House of Beor, what is essential? So here's one of my things, and here's one of the other reasons. I didn't even mention all of my reasons for wanting to compress. Here's the other reason I would like to compress. A very large percentage of the stories of men pre-Dagor Braga Locke, go back to the text and look at what percentage of the prose just deals with men moving house. First they camped here, then they moved over to there. Then after a while they removed to this other place, after which they came and started living over here with these other people. It's like 90% of the story of the men. And that's not high drama, folks, in general, right? And in my mind, eminently compressible. Or to say it in another way, we can do more with the stories of these men than just show their migratory patterns, right? I think that's exactly, Marie. The story is about whether or not the men are aligned with the elves and joining in the war against Morgoth. And so therefore, I think that we can cut out the middle stages in a lot of the kind of migrations, right? So Boromir, for instance, right? Like Boromir is the generation I was arguing that we cut out, though I want to keep his name, as a minor character. I would rather have Boromir than Braga Locke be the dude who dies in the Dagger of Braga Locke, but whatever. He's the generation I want to cut. Yeah, we need to get them to Dorthonion, but let's just have them move straight to Dorthonion, right? So Beor's thing, right? The story, like, what does Beor mean? Pop quiz. Translate the name Beor. It means... like what he calls himself vassal. Like he names himself that, like he takes this name because he is the faithful servant of the elves, right? So
wow, we all whiffed.
Everybody whiffed on that one. Yeah, that was yeah. It's hard because it does sound like Beorn, which does mean bear. So it doesn't mean bear, though it seems like it should. It means vassal, right? Now, notice it doesn't mean slave. It doesn't mean even servant, and it doesn't mean serf. It means vassal, right? He is still a lord who has sworn service, sworn fealty to a higher lord, right? So, okay. Beor's story, therefore, so yes, like the big question in drama at the beginning with the men is going to be, what are they? So they arrive in Beleriand. What happens next, right? And what happens next has two sides to it, obviously, right? There's the question of the men. Hey, human beings, you've arrived in Beleriand. Where are you going to go, and what are you going to do next, right? Hey, there's this big war on with the evil god of the north. You want part of that, right? You want in on that action, or not, right? And we know that some of the men are going to choose not, and they're going to leave again. So that's that's the big question. That's the big sort of drama with the men. What do? Do they ally themselves with the elves or not? Do they fight alongside the elves or not? Do they just mind their own business? And of course, if they mind their own business, do they stay and mind their own business in Beleriand, or do they leave and mind their own business elsewhere, right? So that's the big question in the first generation of men, in the first half of the season. That's the big question. From the elf point of view, of course, the big question is, whoa, who are these people and what do we do with them, right? Do we want anything to do with them? Are they useless or are they not useless, right? The Feanorians, a lot of the Feanorians are going to be like, I vote useless, right? Caranthir is going to vote useless at first. Anyway, so we're going to, but of course, Finrod is going to be so we're going to have different schools of thought here about how and then we're going to have Thingol making his delightfully, his statements dripping with dramatic irony about how he will never allow a human to come within his realm, obviously. So anyway, so we're going to have different reactions from the elves as well. So establishing what the men do, to some extent, it seems to me. Remember when we were talking about this, the elf capture and release program, and we were thinking about the different ways in which, like the different possible outcomes, and we decided we wanted to have like a character, like at least one character, who was sort of whose story demonstrated each one of those, so we could see the full scope of that particular story. I think we need to do a very similar thing here. With the men and with the different houses, right? Let's not just have a bunch of names of houses that people have to memorize and then have them moving around all over the place. Let's instead focus on the division of the groups of the different kindreds of the men, defined by the different avenues that they take in response to these questions, right? So Hollis, as you say, Marie, is... Beor is defined by his allegiance to the elves from the beginning, right? He is all about serving the elves. Hollis is all about independence, right? No one is going to tell Hollis what to do, but she is going to do what she wants to do here in Beleriand, and no one's going to stop her, right? Not even Thingol, whom she's going to face down. And
so you're telling me that nobody's going to put Hollis in the corner. Is that what you're saying?
No one's going to put Hollis in the corner. Yeah, exactly. That is exactly true. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, now you got an Eminem song in my head, but that's okay. Yes, and I'm trying not to quote it because that's almost always inappropriate. But and then we have there's the middle ground, right? There's Beor, who's 100% pro elf. There's Hollis, which is 100% independent. Then you've got the other kindred, which is, until Hodor comes along, really ambivalent, right? So you've got this kind of, we're sort of supporting, but we're sort of not supporting. And some of us are going away and a lot of us are staying, until Hodor comes along, moves to Hithlum, and everything's fine. I think that we can streamline that story a good bit. Again, if Hodor, I don't know. My first impulse, and I think I mentioned this at some point during season 4, my first impulse was to say, what if it's Hodor who is the leader of the third house there? Haleth, Hodor, and Beor are the big three in the first generation there. But we don't have to do that. We can keep Hodor as, the elder statesman at the beginning of the, he's like the grandpa at the beginning of the, of the next, maybe not grandpa, but the, gray-haired but still hale and hearty warrior king at the beginning of the second half of the season. Anyway, I maybe Amlach. Maybe we choose Amlach as the major leader. We kind of raise his portfolio a little bit, and make the big three into Amlach, Haleth, and Beor in the first generation, which. Yeah, and if we do, I would recommend just cutting Marach and Malach. Just cut them. I mean, they're almost non-entities in the Silmarillion as is. We know nothing about them. We get no stories about them. I won't grieve for their loss because we don't know anything about them. So yeah, why not Amlach, right? If we're going to make him, if we want to emphasize his storyline anyway, right? Anyway, so introducing a distinction between, or really giving a definition, giving a purpose to that middle group, right? The big group that's kind of the squishy in the middle big group between Beor on the one end and between the very decisive Beor and Haleth on either end, right, of the human spectrum. Yeah, they do frighten the green elves, but again, they can do that under Amlach's leadership just as well as they can do it under anybody else's. Anyway, so, yeah. No, Stephen, my original suggestion was not that we make Hodor super old and, dying, at the age of 120 or something in the Dagor Braga Locke. My original suggestion was that if we just promoted Hodor to the head of the genealogy and made him one of the first generations, that we remove him and replace him by somebody else in the later half of the story. Like, for instance, other Sir not appearing in this film, his son Galdor, right, who gets almost nothing at all, right? We got Hodor, who's awesome, and Hurin, who's super awesome, and Galdor, who's the guy you always forget about in the genealogy. I don't know about any of you, but I know there was a long period of time. There's a discrete period in my life when I had forgotten that Hurin was not the son of Hodor, right? Because I always skipped Galdor. And then he says it, he introduces himself as Hurin, son of Galdor, to Meme at the end of his life. And I'm like, oh yeah, Galdor, he existed. But again, like, who is he? What does he do? We get nothing, but whatever. It's fine. Let's keep Hodor for the second, or even again, sort of transition. Maybe we have, juvenile Hodor at the end of the first half, and he's, advanced middle-aged Hodor, again, the sort of grandfatherly warrior grandfather at the, in the second half, whatever. But yeah, I don't want to introduce characters. I would rather not even name characters unless they have a role to play in the narrative. We don't want to put people in the show in the position where people often feel put when they read the Silmarillion, which is, am I supposed to remember this? Is there going to be a quiz later? Right? Do I have to remember the difference between Marach and Malach and which one was whom? And the answer is no, you don't. Maybe part of, I will confess, perhaps part of my desire to compress this is like after like a long career of like helping people recover from not being able to read the Silmarillion the first time. And this is the problem that people always have. And I don't want to replicate that problem. Why should we? If there's one thing in the Silmarillion I do not want to faithfully represent in our adaptation, it is that. It is is there going to be a quiz later genealogical element of it? It's something that fits with the kind of story that the Silmarillion is, the kind of narrative that the Silmarillion is. We're telling a different kind of narrative, and I would rather not even talk about people that aren't important, people that we're not even gonna mention, unless there's a reason. So if you want to keep people, you've got to give me a reason. They have to have there has to be a job for them. There has to be a purpose for their existence, a purpose that cannot be easily filled by somebody else, right? So for instance, Boromir moving into Dorthonion does not make the cut. Yes, he does a thing, but it is a thing somebody else could do just as easily or actually better than he could, right? Why not have Beor move to Dorthonion? I'd be fine with that, right? Beor could be sent to Dorthonion. Easy. His first relationship is with Finrod. Of course it is, right? But Finrod, as we know, is closely related to the guys who are in Dorthonion, right? What if Finrod sends Beor to Dorthonion with his people, right, to help support Angrod and Agnor? No problem, right? Stephen, Boromir being Andreth's father is not a reason not to cut him. She just needs a different dad, and there's plenty of guys with Y chromosomes who are perfectly capable of begetting daughters running around, right? That's not enough reason to introduce a new character. Like, the dude whose only importance is he happened to beget Andreth is not a good character, right? We need a story.
I would actually like to request of our listeners that we don't get the kind of resistance that we had last season to this stuff. Really, because I mean, it's going to be even more people this season. So it's like, I don't really want to spend our sessions hashing over why someone should stay in the story. I think Corey, what you said is good. If there's a good justification or there's a good storyline, yeah.
Pitch a story. If you want to pitch a story, by all means. But we can't cut him because he's mentioned in the text. Yes, we can. In fact, we should, unless there's a story. That's the way this kind of translation from one form of narrative to another, which is inescapably what we're doing in adapting the Silmarillion in this model, requires that, right? So again, pitch stories. I'm so ready to listen. And as you know, I am not unwilling to be convinced of things. And as you probably also know, I'm a big sucker for an awesome story. So come up with an awesome story and I'm all ears, right?
Let's not get carried away here and say, don't take that to mean you're guaranteed to get your way if you come up with an awesome story.
No, exactly right. I still might not like it, or we still might not have room for it. But yeah, absolutely. And Stephen, who is there to comfort Andreth after Agnor breaks her heart? Finrod. Finrod is there. That's where we get the element of the Athrobeth in. I don't think we need to dramatize the Athrobeth, their whole theological discussion. But yes, Finrod, I insist, absolutely insist on having Finrod comforting Andreth, because the tenderness and sensitivity of Finrod towards Andreth in that conversation is to me one of the most important and deeply moving elements of it's one of the reasons I love the Athrobeth. So yeah, no, Finrod, no problem. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Mike says, cut for an elf means they don't exist. Cut for a man can mean they live an unremarkable life and die in the background. Agreed. I just don't want to mention them because I don't want to confuse people. I don't want to confuse. We can imagine any number of unnamed men having interesting lives and dying without being mentioned in the story. But in which case, I want to go whole hog on the not mentioning. That's all. That's all. Anyway. We will see. Okay, so again, I think Beor's story, the focus and thrust of the House of Beor, their primary dominance, especially in the first half, but all the way through, they are the most staunch supporters. They are most intricately connected with men. Now, the relationship that Hodor and his sons are going to have with Fingon is going to be different. Different in quality, but not... but they're going to be connected. They're going to swear loyalty to Fingon as well, with Hodor especially. But anyway, let's let's now. And I agree, Mike. If we find that it creates too many we can insert a couple unnamed or barely named duds in order to enable time to pass. That's totally fine. Yeah. Just as we conveyed the passage of time off stage time, right, with elves by having buildings constructed and cities rise in the meantime, right? So too, it becomes easier to convey the passage of time in the era of men because we just have to have somebody show up as grandpa who used to be a kid, or again, somebody like allude to, their dad who has since died, whom we never met, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, graveyards. Exactly. We have opportunities there. Graveyards expanding over time. Sure. Sure. So, and it may well be when we hash out the details that we want to add some extra chronological padding somewhere. And if so, we've got plenty of candidates for chronological padding. But that is certainly... Chronological padding isn't plan A. Anyway, okay. Beor and his loyalty, first half. Andreth and her wisdom and leadership, honestly. Andreth needs to be a big deal. I mean, well, we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to discussing these in more detail when we're doing the episodes and stuff. But Andreth, I want Andreth to be something like the leader I know that Barahir is going to be. So I want to preserve something like the genealogy of Rian and Morwen. But another reason that I would like to de-emphasize Braga Locke is that I would like to more emphasize Andreth. I don't want her just to be a woman who is wise. I want her to be a leader among them in the House of Beor. At the very least, somebody that people defer to. But I would not at all be opposed to having her be the leader. and that leadership passes not from Braga Locke to Barahir, but from Endris to Barahir. I would kind of like that story. Again, I don't want to lose the genealogy of Rion and Morwen entirely, if we could figure out another way, but I would kind of like Endris to be a big, because you see, here's why. Endris in this way is a really interesting parallel figure to Beor in the first half, right? Beor is all about the elves, right? He loves the elves. He pledges himself to the elves. He joins himself to Finrod in his house, right? Then there's his granddaughter, or whatever she is, right? Endris, who also loves the elves and also wants to join herself to the house of Finrod in a different way, right? So we've got, on the one hand, in the first half of the season, Beor is the rock, right? I mean, this is like, oh, hey, the commingling of humans and elves is awesome. This is totally how it should be. And then we've got Andreth and Ignor at the end, and it should be like, well, there are potential down. Maybe we should establish some boundaries. I mean, again, like, you see the issue, right? I mean, I think that's a really interesting sort of parallel structure. So again, having Beor be the leader in the first half and Andreth in the second half is another thing that sort of structurally appeals to me as far as the narrative is concerned. But we will, we'll see. We'll see what we can do, and we'll see what we can do with the genealogy, with a revised genealogy of the House of Beor and what it would look like. I'll be interested to hear suggestions about that. I don't object to having somebody important from the House of Beor die in the Dagor Braga Locke, but again, there's plenty of people around and plenty of people dying in the Dagor Braga Locke, so I'm not too worried about a shortage of corpses at the end of the day. Okay. House of Hador. All right. The House of Hollis. I want to come back to the House of Hador. House of Hollis. Because this one is sort of simpler. Like I said, just as Beor is we're all about the elves and we pledge our loyalty to the elves, Hollis is the we're staying free agents house. We can emphasize the conflict with the green elves. We need to have we need to have the one story that the one real story that Hollis gets, the death of Haldad and Haldar, and Hollis' personal heroism and the heroism of her people, the grudging respect of Caranthir. These are all things that need to happen. So positioning the Haladin so that they are able to be attacked and have this stuff happen is important. The passage through Nen Dungortheb is important, clearly, and the settling in the forest of Brethel is important, if only because we get to see her being cheeky to Thingol. Yeah, so all that, but again, I would love to do more with her here, and I'm not sure what, and I'm not sure how. What kind of, again, real stories, what kind of real stories do we tell about Hollis and her people? I don't know, but again, I would certainly like the journey of the Haladin through Nen Dungortheb not to be just a geopolitics story, right? Not to be something that is summarized in a paragraph as it is in the Silmarillion. And again, that's the form of narrative that the Silmarillion is undertaking, but that's not our form of narrative. The passage of the Haladin through Nen Dungortheb needs to be like, Helcaraxa light, but only slightly light. It's in a different proportion, and the dangers are different. But it needs to be a similar kind of experience for the people who are in it. But remember, it's also Thingol's bloody fault because he won't let them pass through Doriath, right? So the unfriendship of the Green Elves and then the unfriendship of the Grey Elves lead to the very great suffering of the Haladin. So their story is also one of triumph in adversity. and adversity that is. So again, we've got these two different sides of the relationship between humans and elves, right? In the Haladin and the House of Beor, right? So we get to sort of fairly see both of them. We get to see elves looking good and elves looking bad, and anyway, so that I think is very interesting. Will we include the Druidine? I think we have to. The question is when and where. We had talked about a long time ago.
Such a good question.
It really is.
I don't think we want to do them right away. I think we want to save them for the right moment.
We have time.
What if they were involved in some kind of confrontation with Sauron?
Yeah, we could.
Maybe there are people that Sauron can't influence.
I guess really what we want to do is plant the seed of their like clear enmity for orcs.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
But what do we want to do that this season? It seems like not, right?
Yeah.
Or yes.
The other big opportunity, this is one opportunity when we're doing the Haladin, is one big opportunity, but the other big opportunity, of course, will be in the sort of the greater neighborhood of Turin Turambar, right? And like Nargothrond and Glaurung, right? In that area, we will have an opportunity to bring stuff in there. We do need to lay the seeds for that somewhere, Mike. I do agree with that. Here's the tricky thing. We talked about this. When did we talk about this? Beginning of season 4, maybe season 3. I don't remember when we talked about this. Feels like ages ago, but then again, so does 2 weeks ago always. So, we had talked about the Druidine, the Pukum, the wild men, the Wozes, and the Hobbits. Both of them, I mean, they're both sub-races of men, and we wanted both of them to have, we want to explain, Tolkien never explains the development of like the evolution of these sub-races of men. That's never explained by Tolkien. And we wanted, not that we were going to explain this in exposition, but we wanted our sort of private story of how this came to be the story of a particular one of the Valar who comes and like sort of adopts a group of men, like a village or a nation or a people of men, and they are sort of adapted over time by that one of the Valar. So we had talked about that. So my question is, when does that happen? As far as planting seeds, Mike, that's my main question. Also, who? Do we ever decide who adopts the Druidine? Yeah, no, I'm not saying we want to show that on screen. I'm not really, I'm not voting for, I'm not saying that. I'm just thinking we need to, we need to know when it happens so that if we do need to tease it or plant seeds, as Mike was suggesting in some way, it can affect how we interject them into the timeline, is what I'm saying. Orome, Rhiannon says, how does this not interfere with Morgoth and his corruption of men? Oh, easy. Morgoth gets in first. So Morgoth does his thing first. So, like, original sin has already happened, right? Hobbits and Druidine are not unfallen. Like, they're not totally uncorrupt. You can tell that hobbits are not uncorrupt. Hobbits are corrupt, right? I like two words, silver spoons, right? Hobbits are corrupt. So, like no race that that like gets a present, goes out back around and comes in by another way to get another present is not unfallen, right? So, or is unfallen. Like they're totally fallen. Like clearly, come on now. But anyway, so yeah, so Morgoth does his thing first, and then men are distributed everywhere, and then it's after that that the Valar adapt these random Valar adapt random people. Yeah, Nick says one word, ring. Right? Yeah, no, exactly. Ask Diego about that. Sure. But anyway, yeah, we're not going to do hobbits for a while yet. Clearly, they're not going to enter in the First Age. But the Druidine. Aule suggests himself to me because of the stone connection and the whole carving thing, the whole connection between them and stone statues. No, Rhiannon, it doesn't have to be a Vala. It could be a Maya. I have no objection to that necessarily. And I don't think we need to decide on the Hobbit one. I also don't think we need to get distracted by this right now. Let's say no on the Druidine for season 5. Let's not include them in the major plots here. Their arrival can be later, and their introduction can be later. I think we're going to be fine with just introducing the race of men full stop, without also then having to say, and here are these weird freak show subrace of men who are different from the rest of the men. Like, let's establish men in this season, and then we can introduce the more different men in a future season. Yeah. Julie, that is interesting. Julie says Aule could be interesting, sort of connecting and contrasting with the dwarves, right? Yeah. Aule has a type, and it is short and squat, right? I'm sorry, that's just how Aule likes him, right? Anyway, yeah, okay, yeah, no, I could see that, Stephen. I could see the Druidine arriving sort of off stage during season 6. So after the Baron and Luthien story, when like we return to the rest of Beleriand, right? The Druidine have arrived. Makes sense to me. Yep. Absolutely. But no, we know, I'm sorry, someone is asking this and I forgot who it was before. We do definitely know that the Druidine, the Woses, were in Beleriand. There are stories of this, the story of the Faithful Stone in Unfinished Tales. And of course, they're going to get to Numenor, the Druidine. So they need to be in Beleriand in order to get to Numenor too. So anyway, okay. But let's not worry about the Druidine anymore. Great question, but I'm done talking about that. Okay, so I feel like the trajectory of Holith's people and sort of the themes of Holith's people are pretty clear just from the outline that we were giving, that you've given here and that we were talking about before. My question is just thinking more about what she personally accomplishes, but honestly, just kind of showing the journey through non-Dungortheb and how is it that Holith gets the people through. There's a story there, several stories there, right? The strength of her will, yeah, but what does that mean? Like, what does that look like day to day? What does that look like on the ground? We can show that. We can show her heroism. Yeah. I think that we've got some possibilities there. Yeah, Marie, good. Freedom and independence and strength in adversity and commitment to fighting evil. Yeah, you're right. She's not pro-elf, but she's anti-orc, right? Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, no, there are lots of good things we can establish with the Holodine. And the Holodine give us a wonderful opportunity to show, like, being one of the good guys among the humans doesn't mean licking the boots of the elves. Like, you don't have to be a toady in order to... I'm not dissing Beor. I love Beor. He's great. I'm not saying that we make Beor a spineless sycophant. I'm just saying I know people whose reaction to Tolkien in general is like, oh, the elves are all awesome in every way and the humans are second fiddle every time, right? And if somebody has that reaction to Tolkien, it is very hard to convince them out of it, right? It's possible, but it's very difficult because there is a very great deal of textual evidence that they can bring to the defense of their position, right? Is what I'm saying. So I totally think that Hollis gives us a really fun opportunity to show just a different breed of good guy among the humans. Not untroubled, right? I mean, not uncomplicated. Hollis can have her rough edges, there can be things that are not 100% awesome about Hollis, but, she is awesome, but in a very different mold from Beor or Hodor or any of the rest of them. Stephen, that argument, the elves aren't always awesome. Look at the Feanorians. I often try to start there, but again, if somebody has that sense already, it gets hard to talk them out of it. Even if you can provide negative examples of elves behaving badly, right? It's still hard to talk people out of that view. I know, Marie. I knew Marie was going to bridle at that, right? I know, Marie. You love the Feanorians. It's not that there's nothing to love about them, but there we go. Okay, let me be responsible now and go back to the House of Hodor because it's more complicated. It's that middle ground, right? Again, we got Beor on one extreme, Hollis on the other extreme, and the House of Hodor in the middle. Okay, let me sum up the history of this whole group of people. They dither around for a long time, and then Hodor commits. There's my one sentence summary of the trajectory of this house. We can do better. We can do better there than that, right? I'm not saying that summary needs to be our guiding principle. What I would kind of like to do is make sure, yes, Murray, we have to make sure that we make a story out of the dithering, right? That it's not just, we've got Hollis doing her thing and Beor doing his thing. The people of Amlach, as I'm kind of thinking of them, need to have a thing that they're doing, right? And if being indecisive or being divided among themselves is the thing that they're doing, that's okay. We just need to make sure that we're embracing that as a story, and that we make an interesting story out of that, and we connect it. Both we make it correspond in interesting ways with the story of Beor and the story of Hollis, and that we make it, a good and sensible part of the overall story of the season. Yeah, good. Exactly, Nick. Like we did with Elway's people on the journey to Valinor. We didn't want the Teleri just to look like the group of elves with shorter attention spans than the other groups of elves, right? We gave them good reasons for doing what they did. Whenever a group stopped, there was a story why they stopped, right? And I love what we did with Lenwë and the Ents. That was cool, right? The forefather of the Green Elves. It was neat. So anyway, that's cool. But anyway, so to me, the difficult time is the first, because at the end of the day, Hodor is the turning point. Hodor goes to Hithlum, and he allies himself with Fingon and Fingolfin, right? He's all in on being part of the Elves' War. So once we get to Hodor, they've made a decision. So again, one of the stories that it seems to me it is incumbent upon us to tell, what changes? How do we go from dithering to commitment on Hodor's part, right? And one potential answer to that, of course, is maybe this is part of the whole false Amlach impersonation plot, right? Mike, what you were thinking about that you have in mind there, maybe that's a big part of it. but we need to have that be the story of how they came to commit. But even after they commit, they do end up committing similarly to the house. Like they end up on the House of Beor side of the spectrum, right? They don't go the Hollis direction, they go the Beor direction. But the quality of their connection to the elves is not the same, right? Beor names himself vassal. Hador is called peer of the elves, right? He allies himself to the elves like an equal, and they accept him and respect him like an equal. So that, what's the story there? How does that come about? This is where Hador for me is still a puzzle. Again, I'm okay with having young Grandpa Hador still being in charge and dying in the Dagor Braga Locke, but this is why I kind of want Hador in the I feel like the culmination of the story of this people in the first half, you know, the first generation of this people has to, like, Hador has to come into that, right? If he's going to be the turning point, if Hador Goldenhead is going to be the champion and hero who leads the house forward in this decision, in this direction, getting the dragon helm, Rhiannon, absolutely a really important symbol there, right? He kind of has to be around. I mean, maybe he's a kid, right? Maybe we have like teenage Hador leading his people, right? So we have very youthful leader Hador at the beginning, at the end of the first half. And then we have seasoned, rugged, advanced age Hador still leading the people. And so Hador becomes a sort of a bridge between the two. If Hador were to receive the dragon helm at a young age, like if he were to demonstrate heroic leadership and earn the respect of Fingolfin and Fingon at the age of like 15 or something like that, which, keep in mind, totally realistic for human warrior cultures, right? Yeah, Rhiannon, exactly. Hador could be a kid and a leader without his dad being dead. Yeah, well, I don't know even who his dad is necessarily, but in this scenario, I mean, and what the relationship between the Umlach story and the Hador story is, I don't see that really clearly yet myself. Yeah, Marie says, so I'm saying teen Hador takes part in the council in the role of Magor. Yeah, sure, exactly. Yeah, that's just what I'm saying. I would kind of like his role in establishing his young leadership and his worthiness to be granted the dragon helm of Dor Loman. I would kind of like that to be more than just speaking up at council and leading a march, right? Leading a journey. There should be more than that. It should be somewhat more dramatic. He needs to do. And by the way, here's another angle that I really like on having Hador be really young when he earns the respect of the Elf Lords. Here's what I like about that. That serves as a kind of companion piece to Beor, right? That is, Beor is important because he's old, right? He gets old. He's Beor the Old, and he dies of old age, and he's the first one they see die of old age, and it's a big deal. Hador, if Hador wins respect as a youth, right? So they will meet him, like the Elf Lords will meet him, and he's a kid. Like, they know that even for humans, even the humans consider him young, and the elves consider they're going to have a really hard time adapting, right? They are used to kids, like, you're a kid until you're like 50, right? So like when the humans are like, how old are you anyway? And they're like, I'm 45. And they're like, oh, so you're almost old enough to vote now, right? I mean, like, that's like, they're going to have a hard time understanding the, like, mayfly-like existence of human beings, right? So Hador would he would force a kind of recalibration by the Elf Lords, right? The Elf Lords, even Elf Lords who are beginning to take humans seriously, would not take Hador seriously, because they're like, seriously, this guy, like, is he potty trained? Seriously, people? Like, that's going to be their perspective on young Hodor, right? And instead, young Hodor does something really cool and heroic, probably in battle, certainly in leadership and self-sacrifice and nobility of spirit. And they're like, holy cow, like, even this kid who, like, is not even shaving, well, that's a bad example because the elves are all mostly like that too, we were saying, but whatever. The point is, they're going to be like, wow, okay, again, like, we've got to recalibrate. We don't understand humanity clearly, and we need to get, so they give their respect to Hodor, even though he's like 14 or 15 or whatever, right? Anyway, that's my first idea for a Hodor story, and how that could kind of work. I have no idea how he's necessarily connected with the Amlach story. Don't really know how the Amlach story is going to play out. That's all stuff that we can kind of figure out. But if that's the basic trajectory, right? The Amlach is the major figure in the dithering section, right? And the culmination of the dithering section is the impersonation, Amlach's change of heart, and then he goes one way, that is to Maedhros, and Hodor leads the rest of the people, or most of the rest of the people, or many of the rest of the people, in the other way, and goes to Dor Lomin. End of story. And then, of course, we come back with Grandpa Hodor still around, still wearing the dragon helm, and Hurin, and whether or not, we have, some New Zealand extra playing Galdor or not, I don't know, but we can decide that as we go. Anyway, that's my thought about the House of Hodor. But as I say, I'm really wide open and totally open to suggestions for compelling stories and storylines that people want to build in the story of Hodor. Between Amlach and Hurin, I'm still pretty open to suggestions there. Well, we're getting pretty late. And I know we started late as usual, but we're going long here. I wanted to finish talking about a little more detail, working through the storylines with the men. We've got some more things to think through in some more detail. And of course, we haven't really talked about major, what are our dominant themes going to be? We're going to talk about the frame. So we still have several more, pre-production sessions that we need to have before we start working through the episode by episode outlines and stories.
Naturally.
Yeah. But that's okay. There's lots to talk about, and there's lots that we and heck, I even resisted completing the discussion about the Druidine, right? That's something.
That was a Herculean act.
It was, right? Right. Do I get a dragon helm for that? Maybe not. I don't know. But it was a little bit heroic. Okay. All right. So we've got other things, right? We didn't get back to the elves, right? Okay. More elves, right? The Arathel story. So much to talk about.
Get to the elves.
Dagor Braga Locke. Yep. We need to talk about the Dagor Braga Locke and some things which we don't know which season to put them in. And then we get to the theme. So after that, questions for next time include that stuff that we didn't get to. And of course, we also do need to start thinking about an outline, right? To be thinking about a concrete working outline to begin our discussions episode by episode through the season. So that's going to be our goal. We'll see if we can get to that next time. If not, we will do it the time after. But hey, season 5 has just begun, and the world is still. And where else are you going to go? What else are you going to do right now? Come on now. We got plenty of time to think about this. So for those people who are listening to this episode asynchronously 5 years from now, that was a quarantine joke. It was a 2020 thing. You had to be there. Anyway, okay. Great. So next episode will be, our next session will be on Thursday, April 8th at 10 p.m., 2 weeks from now. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. And I will say, as always, thanks for listening and Godspeed. All right.
I like the idea of having to explain the quarantine joke.
Yeah, well, I'm more and more sensitive to that because, like, people will like write me and they're like, "Oh, I'm just starting film now." So when we're recording these now, I'm thinking, more and more of the, like, anytime we have like totally contemporary, I don't even mind things like the announcements because, like, we'll probably still be doing Mythmoot in 5 years. So, like that we were talking about the Mythmoot of that year is fine, but yeah, like, contemporary events, like even big events like coronavirus and the quarantine is something that's
it's no guarantee it'll stick in people's brain.
Well, I mean, they'll remember that it happened, but I mean, it will be like trying to explain 9/11 to my kids. I mean, it's I'm sure many of you have had those kind of, like, it's hard to imagine what the effect was like if you weren't there, right? Trying to explain, like, the day, like where you were when you saw 9/11 in the first footage of 9/11. It's tough explaining that to kids born as mine were in 2003 and 2008. I mean, it's just so, and there will come the day will come when trying to explain to them about the coronavirus quarantines is going to be a similar situation.
That's true.
But yeah. Anyway. All right. So, awesome. Thanks, everybody. I look forward to a vigorous discussion. I would emphasize to those of you, I know there's many of our stalwarts on the discussion board and major contributors who are here with us tonight. Wonderful to have you, of course, as always. Main thing I would emphasize there again, please always remember that even when I'm making declarations and stuff, I'm open to discussion. I don't want to, like, keep going over the same thing again and again. Like, that's my main thing. Like, because again, remember the podcast episodes, I do have this wider audience that I'm thinking about, right? And they're not going to want to hear me try to convince the same people of the same things 8 times, right? So I'm not going to just, like, go back over it again and again and again. But I am open to suggestions and I can change my mind. And again, like, think of good stories. There's a lot of this that's, I feel like sometimes in the history of the relationships between us, the exec team, and you guys discussing things on the discussion board, there have been some times that you have taken for, like, set in stone declarations, which were brainstorming at the time, so yeah, I'm open to, I'm always open to hearing things. I won't always be open to reopening the same argument again and again, but yeah, I really value your contributions, and I have loved so many of your suggestions and thoughts over time, and I really am interested to hear what you have to say about these things. But
also keep in mind, we are going to murder your favorite character or compress them out of the story.
Probably true. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's good. It's these things are going to happen, right? Yeah. Thanks, Dave, for undermining me. That was great. I appreciate that.
Bet.
Here I had this positive message going, and then Dave is like, yes, but we will kill your hopes and dreams without remorse. Yeah, well, there it is. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. This is going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait for next time. This whole project is such a refreshment in this time, I have to say. So, yeah. And you're right, Marie. It is the Silmarillion. Everybody dies tragically, including your hopes and dreams. So, it's just think of it that way, right? They're just, it's like the Silmarillion all over. Anyway, okay. Thanks, everybody. Good night now. See you guys later. See you guys in 2 weeks.
Good night.
Although the theoretical budget of our hypothetical blockbuster may be unlimited, the production budgets of this and the rest of our fun alternative educational projects are unfortunately not. If you have enjoyed joining our production team, please consider donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.